"Carol, get away from the water. Something's wrong." "He's just playing. He always does this when—" "Carol, no. Carol, no." The scream that followed would haunt everyone who heard it. What started as another peaceful morning at a private exotic animal sanctuary in Texas became a nightmare. This nightmare would expose the deadly truth about keeping the world's most dangerous animals as pets. This wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a disaster waiting to happen. If this story disturbs you, it should. Because Carol Marlyn won't be the last person to die this way. Not unless something changes. Chapter 1. Meet Carol Marlyn, the exotic pet enthusiast. Carol Marlyn was living her dream. At 42, she had built something extraordinary on her 50-acre ranch outside Austin, Texas. What started as a simple love for animals had transformed into one of the most ambitious private exotic sanctuaries in the country. Lions lounged in custom-built enclosures. Tigers paced through climate-controlled habitats. At the center of it all was her pride and joy, a massive hippopotamus she had rescued from a failing roadside zoo. To Carol, these weren't just animals. They were family. She knew every roar, every habit, every personality quirk. Her neighbors thought she was crazy, but Carol saw something different. She saw creatures that deserved love, respect, and a second chance at life. "Most people don't understand," Carol had told a local news crew just months before her death. "These animals aren't pets in the traditional sense. They're companions. They have feelings, memories, trauma. My job is to heal them." Carol's background wasn't in zoology or animal behavior. She was a successful real estate developer who had fallen in love with exotic animals after visiting a wildlife sanctuary in Africa. When she returned to Texas, she was determined to create her own paradise. She spent millions converting her ranch into a state-of-the-art facility. The facility was complete with veterinary equipment, specialized diets, and round-the-clock care. Her friends worried about her obsession. Her ex-husband, David, had left her 3 years earlier. He cited her dangerous lifestyle and reckless priorities. But Carol pressed on, convinced that her love and dedication could overcome any challenge. The hippo arrived in 2019, a 3-year-old male weighing nearly 2 tons. He had been living in deplorable conditions at a roadside attraction in Louisiana. He was underfed and showing signs of severe psychological distress. Carol paid $75,000 to rescue him. This was despite warnings from animal behaviorists that hippos were among the most dangerous animals on Earth. "He's been through so much," Carol would tell visitors. "All he needs is patience and understanding. Animals respond to love, not fear." She spent hours with him every day. She fed him by hand, talked to him in soft tones, even swam in the same pool. To Carol, he was gentle, intelligent, almost human-like in his emotions. She named him Melody and treated him like the family she never had. But what Carol didn't understand was that love alone couldn't erase 3 years of trauma. Hippos, despite their deceptively calm appearance, are responsible for more human deaths in Africa than any other large mammal. They are territorial, unpredictable, and capable of crushing a human skull with a single bite. The warning signs were there from the beginning. Dr. Marcus Rivera, an exotic animal veterinarian who had worked with Carol for 2 years, expressed concerns about her relationship with Melody. Carol was convinced that she could read his emotions, predict his moods. But hippos aren't dogs. They're wild animals with instincts we can't control or understand. Carol's assistant, Jennifer Walsh, had noticed changes in Melody's behavior in the weeks leading up to the attack. He was more aggressive during feeding time, more territorial around his pool. Carol brushed it off as seasonal behavior, but I could see something was different. Despite these warnings, Carol continued her daily routine. She would wake up at sunrise, prepare Melody's breakfast of fruits and vegetables. She would spend the first hour of every day sitting by his pool, talking to him like an old friend. It was a routine that had brought her joy for over 3 years. On the morning of September 15th, it would cost her everything. Chapter 2. The Hippo's Dark Past, a Gentle Giant's Hidden Rage. Before Melody arrived at Carol's sanctuary, he had lived a life of misery that would have broken most creatures. Born in captivity at a defunct zoo in Louisiana, he had never known the rivers and grasslands of Africa where his species thrived. Instead, his world was concrete and steel, chlorinated water and chain-link fences. The roadside zoo where Melody spent his first 3 years was a nightmare. Located along a forgotten stretch of highway, the facility was more prison than paradise. His enclosure was a concrete pit with a shallow pool barely large enough for him to submerge. The water was rarely changed, turning green with algae and waste. His diet consisted of whatever scraps the owners could afford, mostly rotting vegetables and stale bread. Visitors would throw garbage into his pen, laugh at his massive size. They would bang on the barriers to get his attention. The constant noise and harassment took a toll on his mental state. Former employees, speaking anonymously, described Melody as increasingly violent and unpredictable. He would charge the walls when people got too close, recalled one former keeper. His eyes were always angry, always watching. We knew something was building inside him, but the owners didn't care. They just wanted him to stay alive long enough to draw crowds. The breaking point came when Melody attacked another employee during a routine cleaning. The man survived with severe injuries, but the incident forced the zoo to seek new placement for their most dangerous resident. That's when Carol stepped in. When Melody first arrived at Carol's ranch, he was underweight, stressed, and deeply traumatized. His teeth were worn down from grinding against metal bars. His skin bore scars from years of fighting with other animals in overcrowded enclosures. Most experts would have recommended euthanasia, but Carol saw potential for healing. She spent thousands of dollars creating the perfect habitat. She created a massive pool with filtered water, climate-controlled shelters, and acres of grassland to roam. She hired specialists to design his diet, consulted with veterinarians about his care. She even played classical music to help him relax. For the first few months, Melody seemed to respond to Carol's efforts. He gained weight, his aggression decreased, and he appeared to bond with his new caretaker. But beneath the surface, the trauma remained. Dr. Patricia Stone, an animal behaviorist who studied Melody's case, explained the hidden dangers. Hippos are incredibly intelligent and have long memories. The abuse Melody suffered in his early years would have created deep psychological scars. Carol's kindness may have helped him trust humans temporarily, but it couldn't erase the fundamental programming that made him see humans as threats. The science backs up Dr. Stone's assessment. Studies of captive hippos show that those with traumatic backgrounds often exhibit delayed aggression. This can sometimes happen years after their rescue. The stress of captivity, combined with their natural territorial instincts, creates a volatile combination. This combination can explode without warning. Melody's massive size made him even more dangerous. At nearly 4,000 pounds, he was capable of running 30 miles per hour on land. He could move like a submarine underwater. His jaws could exert over 2,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. This was enough to snap a human body in half. Despite these realities, Carol remained convinced that love could overcome anything. She would often swim with Melody, feed him treats by hand. She would even sleep in a chair beside his pool when he seemed agitated. Her friends begged her to maintain more distance, but Carol believed that trust was the foundation of their relationship. She used to say that Melody chose to be gentle with her, remembered her friend Lisa Martinez. She thought their bond was unbreakable. But you can't build a relationship with a 3-ton killing machine the same way you would with a domestic animal. The warning signs were subtle at first. Melody would become more possessive of his territory, more aggressive toward other animals. He became more unpredictable in his responses to stimuli. But Carol interpreted these behaviors as signs of healing. She saw them as evidence that Melody was becoming more confident and secure. She couldn't have been more wrong. Chapter 3. Warning Signs Everyone Ignored. The first incident happened on a Tuesday morning in July. Carol was preparing Melody's breakfast when he suddenly charged at the fence, separating his enclosure from the walkway. The impact was so violent that it bent the metal bars and sent Carol stumbling backward. She laughed it off as playful behavior, but her assistant Jennifer wasn't convinced. His eyes were different that day, Jennifer recalled. Usually when Melody got excited, you could see recognition in his expression, but that morning, he looked right through Carol like she was a stranger. Dr. Rivera, the veterinarian, urged Carol to reassess her interactions with Melody. I told her that hippos don't play the same way dogs do. When a hippo charges, it's not affection. It's a warning. But Carol was convinced she knew him better than anyone else. The second incident occurred 3 weeks later. Carol was cleaning Melody's pool when he suddenly submerged and swam directly toward her. She barely had time to climb out before his massive head broke the surface where she had been standing. Again, Carol brushed it off as curiosity. But the pattern was becoming clear to everyone except her. "We started keeping a log of his aggressive behaviors," Jennifer explained. "The frequency was increasing, and the intensity was getting worse. I begged Carol to stop getting so close to him, but she said I was being paranoid." The final warning came from an unexpected source. Tom Bradley, a former zookeeper who had worked with aggressive animals for over 20 years, visited Carol's sanctuary in late August. He watched her interaction with Melody and immediately recognized the danger signs. "That animal was displaying classic pre-attack behavior," Bradley recalled. "The way he tracked her movements, the tension in his body language, the way he positioned himself between her and the exit. I've seen it before, and it always ends badly." Bradley pulled Carol aside and shared his concerns. He explained that Melody's behavior indicated he was becoming increasingly territorial. He was viewing Carol as a threat to his domain. Bradley recommended immediate changes to her routine. This included the installation of additional barriers and the elimination of all direct contact. Carol's response was swift and angry. "She told me I didn't understand the relationship she had with Melody," Bradley said. "She claimed that other people's experiences with hippos didn't apply to her situation. She said she had built something special with him. It was heartbreaking because I knew what was coming." The sanctuary's insurance company had also begun asking questions. After receiving reports of aggressive incidents, they demanded a full safety assessment of Carol's facility. The resulting report was damning. It identified multiple violations of safety protocols. It recommended immediate implementation of stricter barriers between Carol and the animals. Carol fought the recommendations. She argued that they would damage her relationship with Melody and undo years of progress. She hired lawyers to challenge the insurance company's demands. She consulted with animal behaviorists who supported her approach. But the experts who backed her methods had never worked with hippos. They didn't understand the unique dangers they posed. Meanwhile, Melody's behavior continued to deteriorate. He became increasingly aggressive during feeding times. He often refused to eat unless Carol was present. He would pace his enclosure for hours, making low growling sounds that other animals on the property found disturbing. Most concerning of all, he began testing the strength of his barriers. He pushed against fences and gates with increasing force. "It was like watching a pressure cooker building up steam," Jennifer observed. Everyone could see that something was going to give, but Carol was in complete denial. The final straw came when Melody attacked a maintenance worker who had entered his enclosure to repair a broken water pipe. The man escaped with minor injuries, but the incident forced Carol to temporarily close the sanctuary to visitors. Instead of recognizing this as a wake-up call, she blamed the worker for not following proper protocols. "That's when I knew Carol was beyond reason," Dr. Rivera said. "She was so invested in her vision of Melody as a gentle giant that she couldn't see the monster he was becoming. I stopped treating him after that incident because I knew it was only a matter of time before someone got killed." The tragedy that followed was entirely preventable. Every expert who had worked with Carol had warned her about the dangers. Every incident had been a clear signal that Melody was becoming increasingly unstable. But Carol's belief in the power of love and her conviction that she could communicate with wild animals blinded her to the reality. The reality was that some creatures can never be truly tamed. On the morning of September 15th, all those ignored warnings would finally be proven right in the most horrific way possible. Chapter 4. The Day Everything Changed. September 15th started like any other day at Carol's sanctuary. The Texas sun was already blazing by 7 a.m., and the morning air was thick with humidity. Carol woke up in her bedroom overlooking Melody's enclosure. This was a routine she had followed for over 3 years. She could see him floating in his pool, seemingly peaceful in the early morning light. But something felt different that morning. Carol's friend and neighbor, Rebecca Turner, had stopped by for coffee. She noticed an unusual tension in the air. Carol seemed more anxious than usual, Rebecca remembered. She kept looking out the window at Melody and muttering about how he seemed restless. Jennifer arrived at 8 a.m. to begin her daily tasks. As Carol's only full-time assistant, she was responsible for preparing meals, cleaning enclosures. She helped with the care of over 30 exotic animals, but her first stop was always Melody's habitat. There she would conduct a visual assessment of his condition and mood. "He was pacing when I got there," Jennifer recalled. Not his usual lazy morning routine, but aggressive, purposeful movement. His ears were back, and he kept making this low, rumbling sound I'd never heard before. I knew something was wrong. Jennifer immediately called Carol's attention to Melody's behavior, but Carol dismissed her concerns as overreaction. She said he was probably just hungry, or maybe reacting to the weather, Jennifer explained. There was a storm system moving in, and Carol thought that might be affecting his mood. The storm clouds gathering on the horizon seemed to mirror the tension building in Melody's enclosure. Hippos are known to be sensitive to barometric pressure changes. Their behavior can become erratic before severe weather. But this was different. This was the culmination of months of escalating aggression that everyone except Carol had recognized. Dr. Rivera had been scheduled to perform Melody's monthly health check that morning, but he had canceled the appointment the night before. "I told Carol I wouldn't work with that animal anymore," he explained. "The risk had become too great. I couldn't, in good conscience, put myself or my staff in danger." Carol's response to the cancellation was telling. Instead of finding another veterinarian or postponing the checkup, she decided to conduct her own assessment. She had been reading veterinary textbooks and watching online tutorials. She was convincing herself that she could provide adequate medical care for her animals. She was becoming increasingly isolated from the professional community, noted Dr. Stone, the animal behaviorist. When experts started refusing to work with her, instead of recognizing the severity of the situation, she simply cut ties with anyone who disagreed with her methods. By mid-morning, the atmosphere at the sanctuary had become palpably tense. The other animals seemed to sense Melody's agitation. Many were displaying stress behaviors of their own. The lions were pacing. The tigers were vocalizing more than usual. The smaller animals had retreated to their shelters. Carol spent the morning trying to calm Melody through their usual routine. She sat by his pool, talking to him in soothing tones and offering his favorite treats. But instead of responding positively, Melody became more agitated. He would approach the edge of the pool where Carol was sitting, then suddenly retreat. It was as if he was fighting some internal battle. She kept saying he was having a bad day, Jennifer remembered. But I could see in his eyes that this wasn't just a mood swing. There was something different, something dangerous. I begged her to stay away from the water, but she wouldn't listen. The breaking point came at 2:30 p.m. Carol had decided to clean Melody's pool. This was a task she had performed hundreds of times before. The routine involved draining a portion of the water, scrubbing the walls, and refilling with fresh water. It was a process that typically took about an hour. It required Carol to work in close proximity to Melody. As Carol began setting up the cleaning equipment, Melody positioned himself in the center of the pool. He watched her every movement. His massive head barely broke the surface, but his eyes tracked her with an intensity that made Jennifer's blood run cold. "I told her not to go in there," Jennifer said. "I offered to call a professional cleaning service, to wait until Dr. Rivera could sedate Melody. I suggested anything to keep her away from that pool. But she said she had to maintain their routine. She said any change would damage their relationship." Carol entered the pool area, wearing her usual cleaning outfit. She wore rubber boots and gloves with a long-handled brush. She had done this exact routine over 1,000 times, but today would be different. Today, 3 years of trauma, aggression, and ignored warnings would finally explode. It would explode in a burst of violence that would end her life and shatter the illusion that love could tame the wild. As Carol approached the water's edge, Melody began to move. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed and purpose. The gentle giant that Carol believed she had rescued was about to reveal his true nature. There would be no escape from the monster that trauma had created. Chapter 5. Minutes of Terror. When paradise became hell. The attack began at 2:47 p.m. Carol was kneeling at the edge of the pool, testing the water temperature with her hand when Melody struck. There was no warning, no growl, no sign of aggression. One moment he was floating peacefully in the center of the pool. The next, he was moving like a torpedo toward Carol's position. Jennifer was 30 feet away, preparing food for the lions, when she heard the splash. It wasn't a normal splash, she recalled. It was violent, explosive. I turned around and saw this wall of water, and Carol was gone. Melody had grabbed Carol by the torso and dragged her into the pool in a single, devastating motion. His massive jaws, powerful enough to crush a watermelon, had clamped down on her midsection. The force of the attack was so sudden and brutal that Carol didn't even have time to scream. I ran toward the pool, but I could see it was already too late, Jennifer said. The water was churning, and there was blood everywhere. Melody was thrashing back and forth with Carol in his mouth like she was a toy. Jennifer immediately called 911, but the nearest emergency services were 20 minutes away. She then called Dr. Rivera, Tom Bradley, and anyone else she could think of who might know how to stop a hippo attack. But the brutal reality was that once Melody had committed to the attack, there was very little anyone could do. Hippos don't just bite and release, explained Dr. Stone. When they attack, they grab their victim and perform what's called a death roll. They spin in the water to disorient and drown their prey. It's the same technique used by crocodiles, and it's almost always fatal. For nearly 10 minutes, Melody continued his assault. He would surface briefly, giving Jennifer hope that Carol might still be alive. Then he would dive again, taking her deeper into the pool. The water, which had been crystal clear that morning, was now dark with blood and debris. Rebecca Turner arrived during the attack, having heard Jennifer's screams from her nearby property. "I'll never forget the sound," she said. It wasn't just Jennifer crying for help. It was this horrible thrashing, like a washing machine full of rocks. And underneath it all, you could hear Melody making these grunting sounds, like he was enjoying it. The two women tried everything they could think of to stop the attack. They threw rocks at Melody, used air horns to try to startle him. They even considered jumping into the pool themselves, but nothing worked. Melody was completely focused on his victim, oblivious to everything else around him. "We called the police, the fire department, animal control, everyone," Rebecca recalled. But they all said the same thing. They didn't have the equipment or training to deal with an attacking hippo. "We were on our own." When the first responders finally arrived, they found a scene that would haunt them for years. Melody was still in the pool, but he was no longer thrashing. Carol's body was floating face down in the bloody water, clearly beyond help. The attack had lasted nearly 15 minutes, and the physical trauma was devastating. "I've seen a lot of violent deaths in my career," said Officer Michael Thompson, the first police officer on the scene. "But nothing prepared me for this. The amount of damage that animal had inflicted was beyond anything I could have imagined." The rescue team faced an immediate problem. How do you recover a body from a pool occupied by a 4,000-pound killing machine? Melody showed no signs of leaving the water. Any attempt to enter the pool would likely result in more casualties. Dr. Rivera arrived with tranquilizer equipment, but even that posed risks. "Hippos are notoriously difficult to sedate," he explained. "The dosage has to be precise. If you get it wrong, you either don't stop the animal or you kill it." With Melody in an agitated state, the chances of a successful sedation were very low. It took 3 hours and a team of wildlife experts to finally extract Carol's body from the pool. They used a combination of loud noises, water cannons, and ultimately tranquilizer darts to force Melody into a corner of the enclosure. Even then, the recovery was dangerous and traumatic for everyone involved. "Carol was unrecognizable," Jennifer said. "The damage was so severe that we couldn't even tell what she was wearing. It was like the animal had tried to destroy every trace of her existence." The medical examiner's report would later confirm what everyone already knew. Carol had died within minutes of the attack, from massive trauma and drowning. The official cause of death was listed as multiple injuries consistent with large animal attack. But those clinical terms couldn't capture the horror of what had actually occurred. As Carol's body was finally removed from the pool, Melody remained in the water. He showed no signs of remorse or even recognition of what he had done. To him, the attack was simply natural behavior. It was the elimination of a perceived threat to his territory. The sanctuary that Carol had built as a paradise for rescued animals had become a crime scene. The dream of peaceful coexistence between humans and exotic creatures had ended in the most violent way possible. It left behind only questions about how such a tragedy could have been prevented. Chapter 6. The Cover-Up and Aftermath. Within hours of Carol's death, the wheels of damage control began turning. The sanctuary was immediately closed to the public. A media blackout was imposed while authorities investigated the incident. But word of the attack spread quickly through the exotic animal community, and the implications were staggering. Carol's death wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a potential catastrophe for the entire exotic pet industry. If the public learned the full truth about what had happened, it could lead to sweeping regulations. These regulations would affect thousands of private animal owners across the country. The Texas Department of Parks and Wildlife launched an immediate investigation into the sanctuary's operations. What they found was a pattern of safety violations, ignored warnings, and regulatory oversights. This had created the perfect conditions for disaster. Carol's facility was operating under permits that were completely inadequate for the animals she was housing, revealed investigator James Morrison. She had licenses for domestic animals, but was keeping creatures that should have been in accredited zoos or wildlife sanctuaries. The investigation uncovered a disturbing truth. Carol had been operating largely outside the regulatory framework that governs exotic animal ownership. Her permits were outdated. Her safety protocols were non-existent. Her insurance coverage was woefully inadequate for the risks she was taking. She was essentially running a private zoo without any of the safeguards that protect both animals and humans, Morrison explained. The tragedy was that she genuinely believed she was helping these animals, but her good intentions had created a ticking time bomb. The fate of the animals at Carol's sanctuary became a major controversy. Melody, as the killer, was immediately scheduled for euthanasia. But animal rights groups argued that he was simply acting on natural instincts. They said he shouldn't be destroyed for Carol's mistakes. You can't execute an animal for being what nature made it, argued Dr. Patricia Hammond, a wildlife advocate. Melody didn't choose to be in that situation. He was traumatized, confined, and ultimately pushed beyond his breaking point by someone who didn't understand the risks. The legal battle over Melody's fate lasted for months. Carol's family wanted him destroyed immediately. They viewed him as a monster who had murdered their loved one. But exotic animal experts argued that his behavior was entirely predictable given his history and circumstances. This wasn't a case of a rogue animal, explained Dr. Stone. This was the inevitable result of keeping a wild, traumatized creature in captivity. Melody was following his instincts, and Carol paid the price for not understanding or respecting those instincts. Meanwhile, the other animals at the sanctuary faced an uncertain future. Many were elderly, sick, or psychologically damaged from their previous situations. Finding new homes for 30 exotic animals, ranging from lions to lemurs, proved to be a logistical nightmare. Nobody wanted to take on the liability, explained Rebecca Turner, who had been named as executor of Carol's estate. The insurance issues alone were staggering. These animals needed specialized care, and most facilities simply couldn't or wouldn't take them. The financial implications were equally devastating. Carol's estate was quickly consumed by legal fees, veterinary bills, and the cost of caring for animals that nobody wanted. The sanctuary, which had been Carol's life's work, was effectively bankrupt within 6 months of her death. She had poured everything into that place, Rebecca said. Her house, her savings, her entire life was tied up in those animals. When she died, it all fell apart because there was no sustainable plan for the future. The media coverage of Carol's death was carefully managed to minimize the broader implications. News reports focused on the personal tragedy while downplaying the systemic issues that had made the attack possible. The exotic pet industry breathed a collective sigh of relief as the story faded from public attention. But for those who had been close to Carol, the questions remained. How had someone so passionate about animal welfare ended up dead at the hands of a creature she had tried to save? What responsibility did the regulatory system bear for allowing such a dangerous situation to develop? Carol wasn't evil or stupid, Jennifer reflected. She was a caring person who genuinely wanted to help animals. But she was also naive about the risks she was taking. She believed that love and good intentions were enough to overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming. The investigation into Carol's death was eventually closed without any criminal charges being filed. The incident was ruled an accident. The focus shifted to preventing similar tragedies in the future. But the changes that followed were minimal. The exotic pet industry continued to operate with many of the same dangerous practices that had led to Carol's death. Melody's ultimate fate remained a source of controversy. Some argued that he should be relocated to a proper sanctuary where he could live out his days in peace. Others maintained that he was too dangerous to be kept alive and should be euthanized immediately. The decision, when it finally came, satisfied no one. It raised even more questions about how society should deal with the legacy of exotic animal ownership gone wrong. Chapter 7. The Deadly Truth About Exotic Pets. Carol Marlyn's death was not an isolated incident. It was part of a growing trend that most people never hear about. This is because the exotic pet industry has become expert at managing the narrative. Every year, dozens of people are killed or seriously injured by animals that were never meant to live alongside humans. The statistics are staggering. According to wildlife experts, there are more tigers living in private hands in Texas alone than exist in the wild worldwide. Thousands of people across America keep lions, bears, venomous snakes, and other deadly creatures as pets. They often do this with minimal regulation or oversight. People see these animals in movies or documentaries and think they understand them, explained Dr. Hammond. But there's a huge difference between appreciating wildlife and actually living with it. These animals are not pets. They're wild creatures with instincts and behaviors that can turn deadly without warning. The exotic pet trade thrives on the myth that wild animals can be tamed through love and proper care. Sellers promote the idea that with enough dedication and resources, anyone can successfully keep a tiger, a bear, or a hippo. The reality is far different and far more dangerous. The industry preys on people's genuine love for animals, said Dr. Stone. They sell the dream of having a special relationship with a magnificent creature, but they don't talk about the risks or the reality of what it takes to safely manage these animals. The regulatory framework governing exotic pet ownership is a patchwork of federal, state, and local laws. These laws often conflict with each other. Some states ban certain species entirely, while others require permits that are rarely enforced. The result is a system that allows dangerous situations to develop with minimal oversight. The regulations are designed for traditional domestic animals, explained Morrison, the investigator. They don't account for the unique challenges of keeping apex predators and other dangerous wildlife. The permits are often rubber-stamped, without adequate inspection or follow-up. The financial costs of exotic pet ownership are also vastly underestimated. Proper care for a single large carnivore can cost tens of thousands of dollars per year. This includes specialized food, veterinary care, and facility maintenance. Most private owners quickly find themselves overwhelmed by the expenses. Carol spent over $2 million on her sanctuary, Rebecca Turner revealed. She thought she was prepared for anything, but even with unlimited resources, she couldn't create a truly safe environment for those animals. The psychological toll on the animals themselves is often overlooked in discussions about exotic pet ownership. Creatures that are meant to roam vast territories, live in complex social groups, and engage in natural behaviors are confined to small spaces. They are forced to interact with humans in unnatural ways. The trauma these animals experience is profound, Dr. Hammond explained. They're torn from their natural environments, isolated from their own species. They're forced to live in conditions that can drive them to psychological breakdown. That trauma doesn't just disappear because someone is kind to them. The case of Melody illustrates this point perfectly. Despite Carol's best efforts to provide him with care and affection, his early traumatic experiences had created deep psychological scars. These scars eventually led to violence. The attack wasn't a failure of love or dedication. It was the inevitable result of trying to domesticate a creature that was psychologically damaged and inherently dangerous. You can't love the wild out of a wild animal, Dr. Stone observed. Carol's compassion was admirable, but it was also naive. She believed that her good intentions could overcome biology and psychology. That belief cost her life. The exotic pet industry continues to resist meaningful reform. They argue that responsible ownership is possible and that additional regulations would harm law-abiding animal lovers. They point to facilities that have operated for years without incident as proof that private ownership can be safe. For every Carol Marlyn, there are dozens of people who keep exotic animals without problems, argued Mark Stevens, a spokesperson for the Exotic Pet Association. The media focuses on the tragedies but ignores the success stories. We shouldn't punish all owners because of a few bad incidents. But experts argue that the success stories are often just tragedies waiting to happen. The fact that an attack hasn't occurred yet doesn't mean the situation is safe. It just means that the animal hasn't been pushed to its breaking point. Every exotic animal owner thinks they're the exception, Dr. Hammond said. They all believe their relationship with their animal is special. They think they understand their pet better than anyone else. Carol thought the same thing right up until the moment Melody killed her. The broader implications of Carol's death extend beyond the exotic pet industry. Her story raises questions about the relationship between humans and wildlife. It raises questions about the ethics of keeping wild animals in captivity. It raises questions about the responsibility of society to protect both animals and people from dangerous situations. We've created a culture where owning exotic animals is seen as a status symbol, explained Dr. Stone. People want to show off their wealth and their supposed connection to nature by keeping dangerous creatures as pets. But that desire comes with a cost that's often paid in blood. The solution, according to most experts, is not to ban exotic animal ownership entirely. The solution is to implement much stricter regulations and oversight. This would include mandatory training for owners, regular inspections of facilities. It would include insurance requirements that reflect the true risks involved. We need to treat exotic animals like the dangerous creatures they are, Morrison argued. That doesn't mean we can't care for them or appreciate them, but we need to do it in a way that prioritizes safety for both humans and animals. Carol Marlyn's death was a preventable tragedy. It highlights the deadly consequences of our society's complicated relationship with wildlife. Her story serves as a warning about the dangers of believing that love alone can overcome the fundamental nature of wild animals. As for Melody, his fate was ultimately decided by a committee of wildlife experts and government officials. After months of debate, they concluded that his psychological damage was too severe. His size was too dangerous for him to be safely relocated. On a cold morning in February, 6 months after he killed Carol, Melody was euthanized at the sanctuary that had been his home for 4 years. The decision was controversial, but it was also inevitable. Melody had become a symbol of the broken system that allows traumatized wild animals to be kept as pets by well-meaning but unprepared humans. His death, like Carol's, was a tragedy that could have been prevented with better regulations. It could have been prevented with a more realistic understanding of the risks involved. The sanctuary that Carol built with such love and dedication was eventually sold to pay her debts. The property was converted into a residential development. Within 2 years, there was no trace of the exotic animals that had once called it home. The dream of peaceful coexistence between humans and wildlife had ended in tragedy. It left behind only lessons about the deadly consequences of underestimating the wild. Today, thousands of people across America continue to keep exotic animals as pets. They often do this with the same naive optimism that Carol possessed. They believe that their situation is different. They believe that their love for their animals will protect them from the dangers that claimed her life. But the truth is darker and more complex. Wild animals are not pets, and trauma cannot be healed with good intentions alone. Until we accept these realities and implement meaningful reforms, Carol Marlyn's death will not be the last tragedy of its kind. The exotic pet industry will continue to sell the dream of taming the wild. People will continue to pay the ultimate price for believing that love can conquer nature. The question is not whether another Carol Marlyn will die. The question is when, and whether we will finally learn from their sacrifice. If this story has moved you to think differently about exotic animal ownership, don't let that feeling fade. Share this story. Support wildlife sanctuaries that prioritize safety over spectacle. Demand better regulations to protect both animals and humans from preventable tragedies. Because until we change the system that allowed Carol's death, her story will continue to repeat itself. The wild animals we claim to love will continue to be victims of our misguided compassion. You're watching Animal Ambush and Encounters, where we uncover the stories that reveal the true cost of our relationship with the wild. If you believe in protecting both animals and people from preventable tragedies, subscribe to our channel. Join the conversation about how we can do better.